Our top story, 2 Duke lacrosse players were taken into police custody in handcuffs early this morning. The first arrests made in the alleged rape of an exotic dancer at a Duke lacrosse party March 13th. 2 sophomores, Reed Seligman and Colin Finnerty, were taken into custody on felony charges of rape, sexual offense, and kidnapping. Both players posted bail and were released on $400,000 bond earlier today. We're joined now by freelance writer Bomani Jones, who lives in Durham. Bomani, give us a feel for what the climate is like down there right now.
Well, right now it's a lot less anxious than it had been for the previous 2 or 3 weeks. We finally have something that we know is going to happen and that we can move forward with. It's not as much speculating and trying to figure out what happened in the case as much now is wondering when we're going to start having hearings and when the trial itself is actually going to start.
We had heard about a lot of protests down there. What has it been like over those last couple of weeks?
Well, in the last couple of weeks, you have to understand that since this issue touches on so much in race, class, and gender, that so many different groups have interest in this, and their causes are represented by some facet of this story. So anyone you could possibly imagine with any gripe in one direction or another has stepped up, on top of the fact that the Duke University community has gotten somewhat defensive about the way it's been portrayed with this relationship with Durham. So everywhere you could possibly imagine, people have had something to say, and frequently in large numbers. All
right, it seems like there are problems between the Duke student body and the citizens there of Durham. I know Duke's president Richard Broadhead wrote about the issues between the two communities. What issues are those?
Well, one thing is that a significant portion of the Duke student body is from out of town. The university itself has a higher white population than the city does. And when you have people that come from New York and New Jersey, from larger areas, into a smaller North Carolina community, they have complaints about there not being enough culture and not being enough activity, which really isn't quite the case with Durham. But the city feels as though people within the university don't respect them, and people within the university frequently don't feel as though there's much for them to do in Durham. So there's a fantastic disconnect between the two, and it's difficult to resolve without people coming together.
Well, Monty, is that just inherent when you put sort of an affluent, whiter community on a campus in a less economically sound black community in Durham? Or is this something unique to Duke students?
Well, I don't think it's specific to race. I went to an institution in Atlanta, Clark Atlanta University, that was about an $18,000 a year school surrounded by projects, and you had some of the same issues. The students feeling that they should not have gone to college surrounded by these projects, and people within the community having a bit of a resentment toward the people that come into their community to go to school, but then don't respect them once they get there. So to specify that to race is a little bit unfair. You have this is specifically an issue of class, not of race.
Okay. As I mentioned, you live there in Durham. Before this rape case focused attention on the Duke lacrosse team, what was the reputation about the behavior of that team? Had you heard anything before this?
Well, I talked to people that had attended Duke, and they told me that the lacrosse team had a reputation for being rowdy and for throwing raucous parties and things like that. And this is a reputation that the lacrosse players not only have at Duke, but in other places within the country. So one of the gentlemen that was arrested this morning, you'll notice that on the day that the students had to submit DNA samples, he also had to go to Washington, D.C. for an assault charge, and the 2 co-defendants in that case were also lacrosse players. So this is pretty well known, not just within Duke, but also around the country, at least at places that have lacrosse programs.
All right, bigger picture now, Bomani. In your mind, what has this entire ordeal done to Duke's image?
Well, what it's done to Duke's image is it's kind of changed the way that people see the school. What we have known about Duke thus far, at least in the sports context, is that it's a high-ranking academic institution that also plays big-time athletics. But a lot of people took that a step further and assumed that the students behave like choir boys, specifically the athletes. But college sports everywhere are impure, and these issues are consistent all over the country. So what people have seen is that Duke is just like everywhere else in the sense that athletes tend to behave certain ways and get away with certain types of behavior. And no matter how high-ranking your academic image is at your school, that's going to remain the case everywhere. And Duke has had to really come to grips with the fact that the country now can see that it's not as different as people thought it was. There are certainly different wrinkles about Duke that differentiate it from other places, but it is not worlds different. It is not the thing that you can put up as a bastion of what's beautiful about college sports. It also contains a lot of what's ugly about college sports.
I know a lot of Duke alums are sort of horrified at how their school has been presented in the light of this whole thing. Bomani Jones joining us here on Four Quarters. Bomani, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.